Us this morning, well, actually this afternoon. I keep defaulting to this morning. My name is Andrea Gillis. I'm one of the assistant directors with Planning and Urban Design. I'm really happy to be along with you today to talk about environmental justice, Forward Dallas, land use, and some other initiatives that we're working on throughout the city. I am going to start sharing my screen because I do have some partners with me on this call who will also be discussing with us. So I'm going to start sharing my screen for y'all. So that we can hop right in. Hopefully there's no major delay in the change. Well, I do want to actually start with, in case there is anyone on the line who would prefer to have or listen to or read the conversation in a different language, we do have subtitles available. So there is closed captioning on WebEx, the mode that we're using right now. And I'm just going to also say that in Spanish, because most likely if there's someone looking for another language, it's probably Spanish. So, si se encuentran disponibles subtítulos en español en tiempo real, para activarlos, haga clic en el icono de subtítulos en la esquina inferior izquierda de la pantalla y luego seleccione español para mostrar los subtítulos. All right. So this is just a quick review of the agenda. I do have some good friends of ours on the call as well, who we've been working really closely with over the past couple of years as we develop Forward Dallas and as they're working on developing different updates to their policy work and working, just within the community in general. I do have Carlos Evans is here with us. He's the director of the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability. I'm sure a lot of you have had, interaction with him throughout the years. We also have Catherine Bazan, who's the chair of the Environmental Commission as well with us. So I thank you both very much for joining the discussion today. Obviously coordination and us working together and continuing to work with the community as well has been really critical throughout this process. So I really appreciate you being with us today. I will be providing just a brief overview over Forward Dallas. You've probably seen that a lot, and the questions are, what is this Forward Dallas thing? What is this comprehensive plan? Then I'm going to hand it over to Carlos and Catherine to have provide some discussion about the work that they're doing, how we're engaging together. But I want to leave plenty of time for us to open it up to questions and answers. And any, final thoughts that you have, any questions that you have on the material that we presented today, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for that. And then also at the end, we have information about how you can stay involved in this. Obviously, this is an hour conversation, but there's a lot of work to be done. So I want to make sure that you all know how to stay involved with this process. So what is Forward Dallas and what is a comprehensive plan? We're not starting from scratch. As many of you may be familiar with, or this may be new to some of you, we do have a Forward Dallas plan already in the city. It was adopted in 2006 and it laid out a big picture vision for the city. But obviously 2006, we don't often think about it being that long ago. I think of the 2000s and I was like, oh, that was just a couple of years ago. This is actually, over 15 years at this point that this plan was last adopted. There has been a lot of change in 15 years. And also there's been a lot of change, but specifically when we're talking about environmental justice in a lot of ways, many people will tell us there hasn't been any change or enough change. So really, that's one of the things that we want to think about when we're moving forward with this process as well. Not just the change that has occurred, but also what hasn't occurred. We really think about when we're looking through Forward Dallas, when we're talking about a comprehensive plan, that is the long range plan for the city, a long range vision. And it's really, simple as the question of how and where does Dallas want to grow? Or where does it want to preserve its areas? We talk a lot about growth and redevelopment, but we also really need to think about where we preserve and where we focus that preservation. And one of the big ideas too with Forward Dallas is we need to make sure that it is coordinating with other adopted policy that's throughout the city. especially, I mean, particular to this call, really working with CCAP, the Climate Action Plan that's been adopted. And CCAP, I mean, really great for us. It already has a lot of direction specifically for land use in Forward Dallas in that adopted policy. So we need to make sure that we are honoring that plan and implementing it through this process, but also policies through, you know, housing and economic development, and also the racial equity plan. So that is just, and I just want to clarify too, that Forward Dallas is a citywide plan. Many of you may be familiar with neighborhood plans or area plans. This is the citywide plan. To ensure that there is a baseline of information and vision and guidance for the entirety of the city. So again, because we're talking about environmental justice today, there are a lot of reasons to update this plan, but I really want to focus on, obviously, on some of the things that relate specifically to environmental justice. And one of the big issues is when we think about what we can do with a comprehensive plan, we think about land uses and zoning as it relates to equity. And in the 2006 Forward Dallas plan, there was a lot of discussion about, there's a lot of language, a lot of text about working on inequities in land use and acknowledging that there have been racist policies in the past that have led to certain conditions that we see today. But we didn't necessarily get to the point of implementing that plan in many cases. And as we've heard from community members, and you'll see in some of the comments later in the map, that 2006 Forward Dallas plan didn't, through land use, address some of those inequities. It still showed as the vision for the land use that there might be predominantly industrial areas right next to residential as one of those key issues that keep coming up. So we really want to put that at the forefront of this land use update. How do we address some of those inequities of the past? There has been work that's been done. The city has been dedicating time and resources and efforts to this, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and we need to recommit to that work. There's also been a lot of work on the ground from neighborhoods and smaller groups in different planning efforts. And we want to make sure that those smaller planning efforts get incorporated into the comprehensive plan, that those goals and visions for those areas get incorporated in this plan, so that when neighborhood groups do pick up this plan, that they can see their goals and vision for their areas reflected in this plan. So why this focus on environmental justice and land use? Obviously, the simplest word, because it's the right thing to do. We need to have this focus, but it's not just coming from us. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of engagement through Forward Dallas. We're about a year and a half into this. We started this about a year and a half ago, at least the public portion of it. And through that engagement and, either in person or virtual or surveys or visits to our website or visits to our maps, we've been hearing time and time again that we need to figure out how to address and start addressing some of the environmental justice issues through Forward Dallas, through land use, through zoning. So the topic has it's been one of the key topics and key themes that have arisen so far out of this process. There are other themes as well that this plan will focus on, housing, transit-oriented development, connectivity, access to different forms of transit. We have groups also that are concerned about agriculture and rural development. We have groups that are very concerned about urban design and how certain things are built and where they're built. Parks and open space are key issues too, but environmental justice really has been a key topic in this planning effort. And so we want to make sure that we're reflecting that in the work that we can do. So what is kind of our wheelhouse? We talk about environmental justice. I'm always trying to manage expectations as well, because we have a certain series of tools within planning and urban design. And so our area of focus in planning and urban design, how to address and help with environmental justice within the city of Dallas, is basically we have land use and we have zoning. And how do we use those two to make improvements in certain areas and to coordinate with our partners to help make some lasting change in some areas that have been identified as having some real issues. So the first thing is the comprehensive plan, which includes the future land use plan. So, we all kind of understand what existing land use is, right? It's what's on the ground. It's when you pass by a gas station, that's an existing land use. When you pass by an apartment building, that's an existing land use. When you pass by a warehouse or a house, that's an existing land use. Most of the city, existing land use and future land use is the same. The vision for the future land use is the same as the existing land use. But there are certain areas in the city where we have existing land uses, where the community or the city or other stakeholder groups have been talking to us about, we need to think about future transitions in certain areas. The existing is this right now, and we don't feel it's appropriate. So what do we transition to? What do we look to the future that we can start to think about how an area evolves into the future and what kind of uses we could, that we could envision in that area for the future? That's future land use. That's the comprehensive plan. So again, I want to, a lot of people get concerned when we talk about change and future land uses and vision. The vast majority of the city most likely will stay the same. But there are certain areas where we have an opportunity to look and think about them differently. And so those are future land uses. It's what we call place types. How do we define a place and what are the kind of uses that make up that place? So from an environmental justice standpoint, one of the key areas, and sort of in the simplest terms, we have certain areas in the city where we have incompatible land uses, where land uses don't necessarily work well right next to each other. We talk a lot about there being industrial uses right next to residential uses, and that can be really problematic. So how do we address that through land use? We've been doing a lot of community engagement, a lot of talking with these, property owners in these areas to address how we're going to handle these areas moving forward. How are we going to work on some of these incompatible land uses, and how do we identify them in our citywide plan? So one of the things that we can handle, that we can do within planning and urban design, is addressing the land uses and making recommendation for land uses, but that's just a guide. The rules, the law, that falls into zoning. So we can have a guide that says in the future, we want this area to transition to X. We would like to move away from these incompatible uses. We think this area, as ownership changes, as businesses move in and out, or residents move in or out, we think the area should transition to this way. That's a guide though. Then what we have to do to make it law is we have to come back in and have a separate process to look at the zoning for those areas. How do we rezone those areas? So through this planning process, we've also been identifying where we may need to go in to do some zoning changes so that we can start moving away from these incompatible uses, where we've all talked about doing that. We do already have some of those going on in some of the areas that have been identified as concerns. We have city initiated rezonings that are happening right now in the Floral Farms area. We have one initiated or, that's programmed to start in the West Dallas area. We're also doing some work in the Joppy area as well for zoning. So that's another piece of it. The other piece of it is code amendments. So our municipal code, our zoning laws, our zoning code there are just changes that need to be made in it. And one of the things that we've done, and some of you may have been involved in it, we made changes to our uses that could be allowable, or how concrete batch plants were approved within the city. if there was a public process, if there wasn't a public process. We did phase 1, which was a quicker fix. And now we're moving into phase 2, which is the longer fix for, between the temporary batch plans and the permanent batch plans. So how can we use the code and changing the code to help with environmental justice? One of the other things that we've talked about too is one of the other concerns is that our agricultural zone in the city includes too many uses that creates the possibility where you do have residential next to heavy industrial uses. So we have to think about how we might change the code to help with those incompatible land use issues. Certain uses next to each other that are not good to have next to each other. And then another big thing and ongoing issue is really coordination and engagement. One, making sure that we're coordinating across our departments, because a lot of our work in planning and urban design is the longer term or the midterm work. And we know that a lot of these issues need to be addressed in a shorter term. One, we can speed up some of our processes, so certainly do that, prioritize certain projects as well. But we also have to lean on coordination with our other departments, our other, external agencies, and ensuring that we're continuing our engagement with the community and continuing to work with neighborhoods, giving, feedback back and forth. When we get information, making sure that information is spread throughout, and really maintaining that dialogue. So I think that's a big part of improving the work that's going on. So I just wanted, so a big part of this, again, going back to Forward Dallas, is what we're in right now, the process that we're in right now is really looking at the map and getting that land use guidance in place of where certain uses should go, where they may need to change over time. So that is a big piece that we're involved in right now. And what we do have, and some of you may have seen, and already maybe have provided comments to, is that we have been working with a consultant, and we have been working to develop an initial baseline map for the city. And largely what this map represents now is either the adopted policy that was in 2006, so we can have our baseline to start with, and then, or any other area plans or smaller area plans that have been adopted since 2006 that may have been different from the 2006 plan. Those are incorporated into this. And then some adjustments here and there because we had to make a call on, where does that property end? Where does it begin? But this is an initial baseline map for people to start providing comments on. What do you like? What do you don't like? What do you agree with? What do you not agree with? What do you think this area should be? Should it be changed? Should it not be changed? We're in the very initial stages of this. As you can see on the map on the right, you can already start to see some of the comments. So you get, at this point, you see a lot of thumbs down, thumbs up, the green are the thumbs up, thumbs down in red. A lot of the thumbs down are reflecting some of the areas because the baseline map, the map from 2006, still incorporated or didn't necessarily move away in a lot of the areas of reflecting a lot of industrial uses in some residential areas. So we're being told we don't like that. We want to see a change here. So we encourage, part of what we want to make sure is that, people know about this map. You can go out, how you can access this map. I have the bit.ly up on the screen. We'll also have some information after this, but making sure that you have that information to start, providing the information. And of course, not everybody's comfortable going online, providing information online or navigating and figuring out this whole map situation. So we also are encouraging people to contact us. We'll come and talk to your neighborhood, your community group, one-on-one, whatever it may be. If you want some more information, you want to talk more about, your place or how you think about the city. So we're definitely encouraging that. And I think I have on the next screen, how you can get involved and how you can continue to get more information from us Again, I know that this has been a relatively brief and very high level overview of what we have going on. But I definitely want to encourage you to contact us, or whether it just be through placing some comments on the map or learning more about what's proposed in the area, or whether it be asking us to come out to your neighborhood group, or whatever group that you may be working with in your community. We're happy to do that and provide more information, because we do want to make sure that people have access to this information and understand where we're going with this and what the next steps are. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but I want to move and provide some time and give some opportunity for Carlos and Catherine to also talk a little bit about what they're doing and provide a little bit more input there. Carlos?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Again, Carlos Evans, Director of the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability. Let me first just say thank you to PUD for this opportunity to speak today. Just as another example of how PUD is working with its sister departments and the residents. So really appreciate the opportunity. And I want to thank everybody on the call for participating today. Your questions and comments always are helpful in moving forward with our projects at the City of Dallas. So I just want to identify a few projects that are underway. Folks on this call may know about them already, so it may be more of an update for you. Some others, this may be new information, but there are primarily four things I want to discuss today. The first thing is the neighborhood level air monitoring program. So as folks on this call may know, we're implementing a neighborhood level air sensor program. Of course, we have a good understanding of our regional air emissions using EPA and TCEQ air sensors or air monitors, but we want to have a better understanding of our neighborhood level air quality. So we'll use this data to inform, for example, PUD's land use planning efforts, and to ensure that we're placing compatible land uses near our residents. We currently have 8 monitors and plan to install 40 by the end of the year. We've installed 5 air sensors so far, so 2 in West Dallas, 2 in Dixon Circle, and 1 in Joppy. In the near future, we plan to install 1 more in Joppy and 2 more in Floral Farms. And moving forward, we'll evaluate the quality of that data. So let me step back. So moving forward, we'll evaluate the quality of data from other active air monitoring programs to see if and how the information may be used to inform city decision making. So next, let me talk about our local air compliance program. So Andrea talked about, much of what they're doing impacts future or long-term efforts, but how do we impact existing facilities? Or, Andrea was talking about existing land uses. So we'll continue to implement our local air compliance program. As many of you know on this call, our compliance team conducts site inspections to ensure that facilities are complying with their air permits. We will continue to conduct those inspections, particularly those facilities in communities with environmental justice concerns. And if a facility seems to be violating their air permit, please submit a 311 service request so that we can investigate the matter. A couple of things that we plan to lay out in the near term. The first is the Dallas EJ mapping tool. We're developing a Dallas-based mapping tool. The tool is to provide our council, city departments, and residents with an understanding of which communities may have environmental justice concerns based on consistent and reliable data sets. So the plan is to start with EPA data and then supplement that data with city-specific data sets, such as data related to batch plants, zoning and land use information, brownfields, and the like. And we're still developing that tool, but as soon as we have that version, a version that's ready for the public, we'll be releasing it for your review. I should also note that we're expanding our brownfields program. So in 2020, we were awarded a brownfields grant to manage the assessment of a number of brownfield properties. We're hoping to expand that work. We've applied for an EPA community-wide assessment grant and an EPA revolving loan fund grant. If we receive the RLF grant, then we'll be able to provide loans to developers and owners to develop property throughout the city, and we'll be able to manage that program consistent with our EJ goals and the land use planning conducted by PUD. I'd like to quickly remind folks that the racial equity plan includes a number of environmental justice measures and goals. I want to let folks know that we are working to develop environmental justice equity indicators to support the racial equity plan. The Environmental Commission, as I'm sure Catherine will mention, the Environmental Commission provided the city with recommended EJ equity indicators. We're working with the Office of Equity and Inclusion to review those recommendations and to develop final indicators. And since I have the mic, I'll just note that we're trying to hire the city's first environmental justice coordinator. That has closed, and we plan to conduct interviews in the next few weeks, and hopefully we can bring someone on board to support all of this work. And with that, I think I'll pass it to Catherine Bazan, Chair of the Environmental Commission.
Thank you so much, Carlos, and to Andrea and our PUD staff for hosting this dialogue. So I want to start by, first I'll introduce I'm Catherine Bazan. I'm the chair of the City of Dallas Commission. The commission is a community-led and equity-focused advisory body that is overseeing the implementation of the city's climate action. We are volunteers, and our commissioners live in Joppy. They live in West Dallas. They live and work in other impacted communities across our city. So these environmental justice issues are important to them and to their neighbors, and they are important to the commission. So I'll tell you a little bit about the commission and work that we've been doing with the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability and with Planning and Urban Design. So we've been working for just over a year now. In December, the commission first met in December of 2021. And our very first agenda at our very first meeting focused on addressing incompatible industrial land uses near residential communities. Some of you who are advocates may recall that in the summer of 2021, we had an endless fight with concrete batch plants, incompatibly located concrete batch plants, one right after the other, and in the same communities, over and over. In West Dallas, we had 4 new applications in 4 weeks. We had an application in Dixon Circle, and we had one by Shingle Mountain. So we worked together with the chair of the City Council's Environment and Sustainability Committee, Paula Blackman, to help us figure out how to get our arms around this issue with a holistic policy that would create a better process and actually consider these incompatible uses and add public input opportunities that did not exist. Staff came back to us with a proposed ordinance, and we took those out to the community for input. And within just a few months, the first phase of the citywide zoning code revision on concrete batch and asphalt plants was adopted. That effort was led by the very same PUD staffers who are collaboratively leading the ForwardDallas efforts and looking for effective environmental justice solutions. And one of the commission's first formal votes was a recommendation adding those environmental justice equity indicators to the 23 racial equity plan, as Carlos mentioned. These are equity indicators are the accountability measures that the city makes sure that the city is essentially walking its talk. So last year we had the formal opportunity to draft the themes of those 4 indicators, one of which specifically speaks to measuring the distance from incompatible land uses to industrial or to residential uses. We very narrowly defined one of those indicators because in the other 3, we wanted to leave room for staff to have input. I think that working collaboratively is the best way to get buy-in, which creates the successful policy adoption. But we defined this one very specifically because we know that the closer a source of pollution is to a person, the greater opportunity there is for them to be negatively impacted. And when we say negatively impacted, I just want to be very clear. It's not, this is a funny smell and I don't like it. It is, this is harming me. It is harming my family physically, and our health is suffering. And this is not something that we see in affluent communities. And so the indicator calls for measuring neighborhood proximity to any environmental pollution that's categorized as a major source of air emissions, a large or small quantity generator of hazardous waste, a current or former landfill, a surface water body that is categorized as impaired, a wastewater discharge facility, or an EPA Superfund or Brown Pro site, a Texas Commission on Environmental Quality voluntary cleanup site, or a municipal setting designation site, essentially any other state-defined impaired property. With that information, as Carlos said, we are going to use the Dallas screening tool to make informed, data-backed land use decisions, and then focus resources on communities where they are needed most. Decisions that our city has adopted that have created some of the worst environmental justice issues within our communities. The commission is committed to working collaboratively both with the community and the city, planning and urban design, the Office of Environmental Quality, to bring the community's concerns to the table and to advocate for a ForwardDallas land use plan that is going to be effective at addressing our long environmental justice. So I'm going to put this in the chat, but you can learn more about the Environmental Commission, how to get involved in our meeting information at climateaction.com/environmental commission. And I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you, Carlos. Y'all are always a wealth of information, and we've appreciated that every time we've, reached out and, asked for your help or your input or the access to data and resources that you have, that you've always, been immediately open to working with us and continuing the collaboration, which I think is just vitally key to working through these issues. I do want to point out at this time, I do want to open it up for questions and answers. We do have, so there is the chat function as well. If you'd prefer to, place a question or a comment in the chat, you can absolutely do that. We have other staff on this call sort of on the back end to answer those questions. Or they may nudge me and say, hey, I think this is something that we should bring to the larger group outside of the chat. But we can also, if you, there's the wait, on this one, yeah, we do have the hand raising function. If you see on the bottom of your screen, there's a little hand next to a smiley face, at least how that's set up. If you do have a question or would like to make a comment, we'd like to ask if you could raise your hand and we will call on you to help, because you might still be on mute, and then we'll take you off of mute so we can have that conversation. And I'll be watching to see if there's any. I know we just got a comment in the chat that the EPA is currently proposing to lower the national standard for particulate matter air pollution. The agency has published a map showing Dallas County being a possible non-attainment area for this pollution under a stricter standard. What's the OEQS and Environmental Commission's response to EPA's proposal, and how does this influence the zoning of PM polluters? Catherine or Carlos, do you want to?
So we're currently, the region is about to be in severe non-attainment for the 2008 ozone standard, which means that the region, let me back up a little bit. So of course you have the Clean Air Act, which is delegated to the EPA. EPA delegates authority to the states. The state is responsible for submitting a state implementation plan that ensures that the state is complying with emission standards, among other things, emission standards under the Clean Air Act. So that authority is not delegated to the city. So it's delegated to the state. So the state is responsible, when we're talking about this region, for ensuring that this region is meeting ozone, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and other criteria pollutants. They're called criteria pollutants, emission standards. So what the EPA is saying here is that the region, so Dallas I'm forgetting all the surrounding counties, are not meeting the 2008 ozone standard and have not been meeting it, so much so that you're in severe non-attainment. So now what that means is that the state is going to have to figure out how it can work with regional entities to meet that ozone standard in the near future. So TCEQ will be working with the region to do that. We'll provide information for that. What we're concerned about, as we just stated a few minutes ago, we want to make sure when it comes to environmental justice that certain neighborhoods are not disproportionately impacted by ozone, by particulate matter, whether it be particulate matter 2.5 or PM10, by nitrogen dioxide. Want to make sure that there's not that disproportionate impact. And if there is disproportionate impact, that our sensors are picking that up, so that we can provide that information to our departments like PUD, and so they can have that information inform their land use planning. So, for example, if there is so area West Dallas or Southern Sector or South Dallas, who has more PM emissions than other neighborhoods or areas, or ozone, or et cetera, then we want to make sure. Oh, sorry, we have a leaf blower right next to me. But anyway, so that's generally what we're talking about. I'll note that right now the region is not. So the region is in attainment for particulate matter. So in other words, the region is meeting the particulate matter standard, but in the future, the region may not be meeting the particulate matter standard. And so the state may have to work out a way to reduce particulate matter emissions in this region. I'm not sure if I answered the question or not. And Catherine may have more information.
I'll just add to it that Misty, that's a great question. And you know that the organizations that we're a member of, like the Sierra Club, Air Alliance Houston, Public Citizen, all of those are currently advocating for stronger PM standards than those that have been proposed. There is still currently an opportunity for community members who want to comment to do so by March 28th. And I will try to see if I can find a link really quickly and put it in the chat before we conclude. But I agree that strengthening the particulate matter standard is only going to strengthen our cities, make them cleaner, make them healthier for our community members. And I see that you've got another question. How does this influence the zoning of particulate matter polluters? That is a great question for planning and urban design. And I think, as Carlos said, I think that our air quality monitors, the regional air quality monitors, if that particulate level is actually strengthened, gives us an opportunity to enforce. And thank you for putting that in the chat. That's very helpful. I don't see the link. If you could pop it in there, that'd be good. But I'll let Andrea respond to how that could potentially shape future land use decisions if we get a stronger federal standard and then it is delegated to the state.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll answer that question. And then I know that Cindy has her hand raised, so I want to make sure to get to her question too after I respond. But part of our coordination efforts is to, Carlos and Catherine have access to different data than what we have. And so as we're developing this plan, we want to make sure that we are layering in that data to any of our recommendations. And part of this plan, the Forward Dallas Land Use Plan, is looking at highlighting certain areas that aren't already currently going through a rezoning process, where we need to start next. Where are some of those other priorities where we may need to look at rezoning different properties? And again, that's a separate process, but we can start initiating it through the Forward Dallas plan. And so that's one of those pieces that hasn't necessarily been done consistently in the past, that we want to change and be more deliberate about, if we plan and we say this and certain things need to be adjusted, then we need to follow up with that zoning. And so using the data that Carlos and Catherine and others may have access to, we can layer that information onto our planning efforts to help bolster sort of those recommendations and the priorities that we have for certain areas. And Carlos, is it on that, or can we go to Cindy first?
It's on that, and I just wanted
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure how much we want to talk about things other than land use and zoning, but that data will also impact other things that we're doing, such as, we're trying to transition as a country and as a world, we're trying to transition fossil fuel vehicles to hybrids and EVs, and we're trying to build EV infrastructure throughout the city, and we're trying to do that in an equitable way. So the data related to particulate matter, ozone, and the like will impact, for example, where we want to put EV chargers. Again, because we want to reduce as much pollution as we can in certain areas, and that's a combination of things, right? That's not just your major stationary sources, but that's your also your mobile sources, and other things. So we're trying to take a holistic view of how we approach reducing pollution in our overburdened communities.
Thank you, Carlos. Cindy, who I want to give you, and I apologize if I mispronounce your last name, I want to give you an opportunity to ask your question.
All right, thank you, Andrea. So my name is Cindy Hua. It's been really interesting listening to this conversation. I come from like a biology and education background, so planning is like definitely not my thing. But I kind of wanted to learn more about, so Forward Dallas is scheduled to be finished in the fall. And I was wondering how the air monitor data from, the city's monitors they're putting up and purple air monitors and like shared air DFW monitors, how that data will be used in like informing future land use plans for Forward Dallas, because there's just so many numbers going on. Like, how would that process actually look? I'm just really curious. Yeah.
So some of that's a really good question. Oh, sorry, Carlos. Do you want to take that one?
Oh, I just wanted to reemphasize the fact that we understand that there are some organizations that are operating other air sensors, purple air sensors, and the like. We want to have, and we've said this before to those organizations, we plan to have a conversation with those organizations, whether that's a 1 day long or 2 day long summit, or whether that's multiple conversations throughout the summer, trying to figure out exactly what data is being gathered, how strong is it, can we use it to make policy decisions, is it as accurate as we would like for city council member decision making, for department level decision making, for zoning and land use planning. If not, are there other ways we can use it? But at the end of the day, the goal is to have a better understanding citywide of what data we have, how we can use it kind of in a coordinated way, so that people like Andrea and Julia and Andrea, they can use that information, integrate that into our mapping tool, and they can use that information to make their decisions moving forward. But that's all I wanted to emphasize.
No, that's really helpful, Carlos, because part of it too is we get requests for zoning cases all over the city, right? And we have to, and at different scales, it can be a couple of properties, it can be, 5,000 properties. And so one of the challenges that we have is how do we prioritize those requests? Because everybody has their priority, right? Everybody has the thing that they focus on, and it's important to them. And so how do we prioritize that for zoning cases and all of these requests that come through to us? So I think getting that data and accurate data and vetting the data and really working through that will help us eventually get to the point to be able to use some of those things to help prioritize certain cases. Or how we think about putting them in the mix of priorities, because that's some of that data is are things that we're missing to help really prioritize certain cases when we have, we have a multiple list of, with different issues. But thank you for the question. Do we have any other questions? Let me see. I have sorry. Alicia Kendrick, I think you came on first with the next question.
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting.
We
But
hear
my
you now.
question is, so Austin Asphalt, the batch plant company that's adjacent to the Joppa community, they've applied for their 10-year SUP to have like another 10 years to operate in Joppa. So what is the Forward Dallas process planning and the OEQC going to OEQS, excuse me, going to do about that? Are they going to stop this process so that Joppa can actually reflect being a transitional area?
So some of these things are a matter of timing. So Forward Dallas, for those immediate applications and for those immediate requests, Forward Dallas is addressing, it's on a different timeline than those. So those need to be reviewed in sort of the more immediate case. Forward Dallas is trying to address how we don't repeat certain things in the future, or how we, work toward that. So for specific permits that are being requested right now, there are other avenues that we need to look at for how we address that work. I'm sorry, I think we have a question from Evelyn Mayo.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. So just a quick follow-up on Cindy. So are you suggesting that the PM data will actually be used to approve or deny zoning cases, Andrea? So if there are demonstrated higher levels of particulate matter pollution and a zoning case that could impact that, that will be considered? That was just my first follow-up. And then my second follow-up is on Alicia's question about Austin Asphalt. I believe the phase 2 batch plant zoning changes would have included considerations around auto renewals and capping the number of years for those auto renewals. So this seems like a missed opportunity. Had those been moved forward, maybe Austin Asphalt would have been caught under that phase 2. Can we have a status update on that? And then my last piece was just on the status of reprioritizing authorized hearings based on racial equity and environmental justice, because I recall y'all had mentioned that was going to happen. TC Broadnax was going to release a memo in January, and we just haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, so the follow-up on Cindy's question as far as will we be using the data to approve or deny zoning cases? No, it was, I meant from the authorized hearing perspective to help as data or a resource when we're thinking about prioritizing or how we're prioritizing or reprioritizing the authorized hearings. And when I say authorized hearings, for those of you not involved in this on a daily basis, that's the city initiated rezoning. So there's a property owner who can ask for a rezoning, and then the city can approve a rezoning for an area, or at least the review and separate process for a rezoning of an area. So that's what I meant, using that data when thinking about how we prioritize different city initiated rezoning cases. An update on the batch plant, the phase 2 of the batch plant is I just got an update from staff that we're looking at potentially, hopefully going to ZOAC, most likely to work out all of the details and going through the vetting of the changes, the amendments, the proposed, most likely starting with the zoning ordinance advisory committee in early May. Because it's still undergoing review by different agencies within the city, and particularly with legal, to make sure that the ordinance is correct. The third one. Yes. So that is A big piece that we're working on is the reprioritization of the authorized hearing. We're bringing a new staff person on for dedicated focus on. So we've been building the city initiated rezoning staff, sort of that division, and building that up and putting more staff resources to that. And we will actually be hiring a new supervisor over that group to really start working through those issues. But I will say that we've got a lot of them already in process and working through. And then obviously for any new ones that come on, we want to make sure that we can look at them, prioritize them with a wider lens than what they have been in the past. I see a hand raised from Derek Walker.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you all for welcoming me. I was a little late. I had another meeting, and I did place my question into the chat. But as it relates to this, and I was on the previous call. I think that the idea of Forward Dallas or land use is that there's land identified for that's livable, right? And when we think about what contributes to that, we think about pollution, as we talked about, but also contamination from a certain. About the full opportunity from an economic standpoint if we look at that, where someone could, let's say, build a pool. Well, you can't build a pool because 200 feet down is contaminated, right? But this land is the same land that was sold from the city of Dallas to a developer who now has capped what they can do economically, and not just having affordable houses, but houses that people actually want. And if a swimming pool is an amenity that helps to attract that, but they can't build one because of the toxicity or the contamination 200 feet down, which the city knew about. And it's also coming from DART. How do we navigate that, right? As far as one cleanup, but also that now becomes an expense, whether it's a lot or not, it becomes an expense from one standpoint to the developer. But also now, if that family wants a swimming pool, they can't have one. So now there are limits. And if you could imagine, I would akin it to being sold, it may be extreme, but a lemon car, right? Like there are policies and there are procedures and legislation to prevent being sold a lemon. How do we address that from a standpoint of one, bringing the attention of home buyers, but also home developers, but also when we talk about contamination, now we're talking about the water. Now we're talking about the entire city. How do we address that from a standpoint of accountability, but also getting that cleaned up?
Well, I can speak to it from a land use and zoning perspective, that it's a really hard question, because we think about, so from a land use perspective, right? When we talk about incompatible land uses, right? And how we want to resolve that issue, and we want people to be able to live healthy and clean lives. And then what do we plan for the future? Sometimes it's hard to really think about, your default is if we could just make the whole area residential, right? But you're right, there are cleanup issues. There potentially may be cleanup issues. There may be contamination issues. So how are you setting, we have to have honest discussions about setting those expectations of future land uses, given what may have been used on the land before. And so that is one of the challenges that we really try to think of when what we recommend for a future land use. We have to think about the state of the land moving forward. That is one of the considerations that we definitely think about. Carlos has his hand raised and might have more specifics to contamination. You're on mute, Carlos.
All right. After the pandemic, you would think I would know how to do that. But is this a particular site or property that you're emphasizing or focused on, or is this just a general question? Oh, I think, was he muted? I think he may have been muted.
There we go. Sorry, I muted myself just to be respectful of the space. The short answer is yes, but also not really that, because it's the same concept that I've seen. Like there's Renaissance Park, right? In Oak Cliff, that was just kind of redeveloped in, I guess, 2019, recently, right? And so just even the opportunity for the community, what it looks like is trash is accumulating in this creek, but also like the natural flow of the land is that it carries the trash from where it is to where it is. So just like I said, just overall, one thing, there's a narrative thing that we probably have to work through, and whatever that is can be that, but also addressing from a standpoint of what the nature is or the current status of it, how do we move forward? So while it is particularly about an area, it still is from a global standpoint a conversation about we're saying responsibility, but also opportunity with that responsibility as it relates to making, I guess, sustainable, livable land available in Dallas.
Yeah, I guess I'd just say that, ultimately you want the party responsible to clean up the site. And so, hopefully that can happen. And there, obviously you have CERCLA and you have various federal statutes that speak to that. To the extent that there are properties that are still contaminated that we want to redevelop, and for which we don't have the responsible parties to pay for that. Again, we have, we're trying to, that's one of the reasons why we're trying to expand the brownfields program, because there are a lot of opportunities in the city, particularly in our underserved communities, to redevelop, whether it's housing or grocery stores or what have you. So we're trying to get that up and running. So far, we've only been managing an assessment grant to assess properties. So EPA has grants for assessment, cleanup, and then again, you have that revolving loan fund grant. If we can get that revolving loan fund grant, EPA only issues 10 nationwide, 10 grants nationwide. So it's, we'll see if we can get one of those 10, but if we can, then that'll allow us an opportunity to loan out money to developers and owners so that these sites can be cleaned up in the appropriate way.
Yeah, I guess the next question, and if I don't mean to belabor the point, but yes, those grants are available and the loan opportunities exist. From a conversational standpoint, is there a recommendation for whom else we can speak with? And so just understanding, just in general, there may be an indirect way to do it if possible, right? Like, yes, these things exist from the Brownsfield, that initiative, and what else may exist to execute some of this, because like I said, one thing, the more people we have to move to Dallas, the idea is that those taxes benefit Dallas and the citizens and the community, et cetera. So like, who is there, or is there someone else to maybe speak with about this, or how do we include this as one of the initiatives? Because I see a priority continually as from an economic standpoint, but when we talk about livability, that's the entire part of the contribution of the ecosystem for land use and just the possibilities that exist with the land use. But like, just last question, like I said, who is there someone else to speak with, or how do we make this a priority, and to some degree over maybe where economics is right now?
Well, I think you have the right people on the call who are listening to this and hearing this. And I think the key to this is our continued coordination. And I mean, all of our continued coordination. Because obviously when we do things all in our, piecemeal work, and because a lot of it is locational, right? It's the resources, and then where do those resources get put? And are we being strategic about it? And are we layering to have a greater impact? And so that's where I think it's really important that we continue this collaboration and we do have these conversations. So I know what's going on in OEQS. They know where we're thinking about prioritizing some work from a land use level. How do we coordinate things that have to go to the Environmental Commission? We're all in line and syncing up on those things, and then listening to you all, because obviously part of this Lunch and Learn is not just Lunch and Learn for the community, it's Lunch and Learn for us largely, and to hear from you what these priorities are. So I thank you for your comments and questions. I know Janie, sorry, Janie, you were on the next page, so I didn't see your hand raised. So I apologize for that. So we are at a little over 1 o'clock, but I want to make sure that we get Janie's question in before we wrap up, and we'll leave some links on the page. And please, for any follow-up, feel free to reach out to us. We'll leave our contact information, and there's the link in the chat of how to access more information about Forward Dallas and also the work that the Environmental Commission does. So take it away, Janie.
Hi, thank you. I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing. You've held a couple of these EJ-focused webinars recently, and I do appreciate the attention to planning for the future of the city from this EJ perspective. I do have a question about the current state of the city, however. So the city has tools to help overburdened and historically marginalized communities achieve EJ, one of those being amortization, which can remove non-conforming polluters that are adversely impacting residents and bring relief to that incompatible nature of residents with residential adjacency next to industrial uses. So why haven't your respective departments or commissions recommended amortization of these polluters? And of course, an example being the GAF asphalt shingle factory in the Singleton corridor, which is one of the oldest non-conforming uses in the city of Dallas.
Want to take that on? So, I mean, I think you're right, Jane. It's a hard question. And I think that there's still a lot of ongoing conversations about that and how to handle some of those more significant scenarios that we have throughout the city, and the realistic avenue for those tools. I know that the conversation has started to work through some of that. I know it's also been prolonged as well. And I'd be interested too where we're at with, in general, with that conversation, because I know that there's stuff going on multiple ends of it, right? And it's a hard one to take because I think at the same time too that there's also, do we try to come at this through a more expedited planning process that we can shift certain users or uses out of different areas? Can it be accomplished through a zoning effort? And what are the realities of that? And what is the time, involved in that to accomplish that? I don't know if anybody else has any comments on that.
Janie mentioned the commission, so I do want to speak for the Environmental Commission's perspective. We've had those meetings with the city attorney's office and the various city departments about GAF, specifically the amortization process, and it's not a quick fix. It is a very long and certain legal avenue. And, I think if it was the only option in that situation, then I think that it would have been the option that was ultimately used. I think amortization is a tool, and the city should look at how it could be applied in instances. A more near-term solution would be ultimately the outcome. But if I recall our conversations with the city attorney's office, amortization could take 10 years, and it could be appealed and ultimately go all the way to the Supreme Court of Texas and be overturned if there was a favorable outcome at a lower level. And then I think that there would be an opportunity for that industrial polluter to continue operating the facility for the entire duration of that time. And so it is a tool, and we need to better understand how to wield that tool. But I think that we have to look at what rights does the city have to go back and correct those incompatible industrial land uses that are incredibly close to residential communities and impacting neighbors across Dallas.
Thank you for the question, Janie. With that, we are at time. Like I said before, I want to encourage anyone who wants to have some follow-up conversations with this. Obviously, there is a lot going on in environmental justice right now throughout the city. We'd like to continue the dialogue, continue the conversations, and continue thinking about ways to address new ways to address these issues. I want to thank Carlos and Catherine again for joining us today. Really appreciate your input and your collaboration. And I appreciate you all for logging on and taking part of your lunch to be with us today. and to ask your questions and to listen. And please, again, follow up with us. This will not be the last of these discussions. So, and stay tuned to Forward Dallas. There'll be more information coming out of that. A lot of updated information and drafts and information for you to digest. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it. And until the next time.